So Professor Manidipa Sanyal is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Calcutta. She specializes in Western logic, analytic philosophy, and the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and has published widely on these themes. Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakrabarti, formerly Professor of Philosophy at Rabindra Bharati University, is currently the Vice Chancellor of Presidency University, Kolkata, and Chairman of the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. His work spans analytic and Indian philosophy, with publications including his book on language, thought, and reality. Professor Enakshi Mitra is Professor of Philosophy and the current HOD at the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. She specializes in Western analytic philosophy and philosophy of Wittgenstein, logic, and philosophy of language and action. With that, I would request Professor Enakshi to felicitate our speakers. Professor Enakshi, kindly felicitate our speakers with a book. Yeah.
Okay. Like Milan Mili is talking in this. It's not Milan Mili is talking here. No, he was talking. It's hard to play once. Subject, sir. Too hard to play. Just take board.
Yeah. Okay, so with this, let us commence the first session. Thank you. Yeah, so the first session is by Professor Manidipa Sanyal, and we'll begin it below.
Please speak first. Who will be the first? Yeah. So could you place yourself?
Yes, the first speaker is Professor Manidipa Sanyal, and we have generally 35 minutes of talk, and to be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A session. I ask Professor Manidipa Sanyal to deliver it.
Good morning, everybody. I congratulate the Department of Philosophy, especially the head of the department, for taking such a strain to organize such a very important seminar, and I am grateful to them for inviting me and for sharing my thought with this august audience. The title of my paper is The Speculative Reason and Myself. The seminal work of Kant, Critique of Pure Reason, has ignited human intellect over decades. Kant's Copernican revolution successfully justified the possibility of synthetic a priori judgments, which are found in mathematics, physics, and many other areas. Though both Hume and Kant upheld the view that metaphysical sentences are meaningless, still Kant's reason in favor of rejection of metaphysical sentences is totally different from that of Hume. And the present paper is an attempt to make some comments on Kantian theory about the dialectical use of reason, taking help from different perspectives. It is a humble attempt to focus on Kantian explanation of why the quote-unquote I cannot be proved as a substance. It will perhaps not be wrong to find Kantian thought as a precursor of Davidsonian project of connecting thought, language, and reality. Kant's Critique of Pure Reason is initially divided into two broad sections: Transcendental Doctrine of Elements and Transcendental Doctrine of Method. The former one is again divided into two sections: Transcendental Aesthetics and Transcendental Logic. The task of Transcendental Aesthetic is to discuss about two a priori forms of perception and to explain the features of a priori synthetic mathematical judgments. Among the three tasks of Transcendental Analytic and Transcendental Dialectic, The main task is to justify the proper application of some a priori concepts to perception. It inevitably helps to point out the far-reaching mistakes and confusions made by men as a result of the improper application of these concepts. In order to apprehend the full significance of transcendental dialectic, it is necessary to understand the Kantian distinction between formal logic and transcendental logic. According to Kant, Aristotelian logic is the whole of formal logic. In formal logic, the logical form and matter are given the primary importance, but it is not the thing by which we can distinguish formal logic from transcendental. The distinction between them is to be understood in terms of their relation to objects. Formal logic examines the pure structure of thinking irrespective of the object. Transcendental logic examines the a priori rules and concepts that make knowledge of objects possible. This transcendental logic is a science of the rules of pure thought concerning objects of experience. It investigates the a priori conditions that make knowledge of objects possible, rather than just the rules of thinking. In transcendental dialectic, it is shown how dialectical use of logic results in the improper application of its principles. The whole venture should be apprehended with reference to Kantian distinction between metaphysical presuppositions of science or mathematics or any other theory on the one hand, and absolute metaphysical propositions on the other. The metaphysical presuppositions consist of a priori principles, which are considered by Kant as necessary conditions for the objective character of a type of objective empirical judgments. They are genuine metaphysical propositions. The absolute metaphysical propositions are, however, not about the possibility of objective experience. The task of transcendental dialectic is to show that belief in absolute metaphysical principles arises from the very nature of our thinking about matters of fact. We have to note that unlike transcendental analytic, there is no transcendental deduction of ideas in transcendental dialectic. This is important because absolute metaphysics is an illusion, though it is not an ordinary illusion which can be corrected with the help of logic. This illusion is irremovable and it cannot be rectified even if it is detected. As Kant considered Aristotelian logic to be the perfect logic, so in his project he took a recourse to Aristotelian mediate inferences, the forms of which are considered by him as exhibiting all possible forms of mediate inferences. He claims to have found in these inferences clue for listing all the ideas of reason and as a consequence all absolute metaphysical principles. The work is pursued in the following way. In a mediate inference, we state the deductive relationship between given judgments. In an inference, premises themselves are only used and not proved by it. Premises means the major and the minor premise. So in order to prove them, we have to look for further premises from which they can be deduced. So in order to prove the premise, we need to show it as following from some other general propositions. In this way, it tries to find the ultimate premise in every chain of syllogisms. According to Kant, in the context of conditional knowledge of the understanding, it tries to find the unconditioned in order to bring the conditional knowledge to completion. Now, Kant's comment can be made clear by a distinction between the logical maxim of syllogistic arrangement and the fundamental principle of pure reason. The maxim is a logical advice that states if a systematic unity is to be given to some judgments by arranging them syllogistically, then one must find a further condition or premise to every condition or premise. Please note that the whole sentence is a conditional statement. So it is not asserting anything. It says that if this, then this. So it is simply advice that states the relationship between the two issues. And this process continues, but every time in simple language, in any immediate inference, the premises are not proved, they are accepted. So if I try to prove the premises, I have to find further arguments from which those major and minor premise can be deduced. And in that way, if I go further and further, then at one point I must find the ultimate unconditional premise. That is the way it works. And this process continues till one finds the ultimate premise, which is itself unconditioned or absolute. This is the maxim. This maxim does not imply that there is an unconditional condition. On the other hand, the fundamental principle has an assumption. The assumption is this: the chain of premises or conditions actually has a last unconditioned or absolute member. So the principle is asserting something. The transition from the maxim to the principle is, however, according to Kant, unwarranted. To quote Kant, quote, "The logical maxim cannot become the fundamental principle of pure reason unless we assume that if the conditioned is given, the whole sequence of subordinate conditions, which consequently is itself unconditioned, is also given." It is the Kantian distinction between the logical maxim and the fundamental principle of pure reason that contains the seed of explanation regarding transcendental illusion. So it is an attempt to find the ultimate premise, which is, according to Kant, an illicit venture. The tendency to go beyond the limits of experience results in mistakes, which are called as illusion. It is necessary to understand this category of illusion because it reveals the character of unavoidable dialectic of pure reason. The term dialectic here is not meant in the Greek sense of sophistical disputation. The term dialectic actually in Greek it means so. Rather here it is a critical treatment of false reasoning. In this context, he also made it clear that the ideas of pure reason can never be by themselves dialectical. By themselves the ideas are not dialectical. He made his two-level use of the term reason, Vernunft, indicating its logical and real dimension. According to Kant, this dialectic is a logic of illusion, which he clarifies as primarily distinct from probability, appearance, empirical illusion and all that. So it is not, logic of illusion is not logic of probability. Why? Because probability may be based on insufficient ground, but it is a variety of truth. The knowledge of probability is imperfect, but it is never deceptive. But illusion is deceptive. Second, illusion is not again appearance. The reason is neither truth nor delusion is in the object, but in the judgment about it. This is why Kant said senses do not err, not because they always judge rightly, but because they don't judge at all. Third, the transcendental illusion is also distinguished from empirical illusion. And empirical illusion, I think I can give one example. Any optical illusion is an empirical illusion. It occurs in the empirical use of rules of understanding which are otherwise correct. In this empirical use, imagination influences, and the result is the faculty of judgment is misled. In philosophical discussion, we have transcendental illusion when the principles which are not intended for use in experience are so used. Those principles, however, can be correctly used otherwise. There is unwarranted extension of pure understanding, which Kant calls deceptive extension. He calls the principles whose application is confined within the limits of possible experience as judgment, and he calls those principles which try to pass beyond the limits as transcendent. That is the principle. Number 4, it is not also logical illusion because it is natural and inevitable. The search for the unconditioned takes 3 directions which Kant derives from 3 recognized kinds of syllogism. There is categorical, there is disjunctive, and also there is conditional. Now, Kant conceives rational psychology. Here, when in the first case, he is attacking rational psychology because he is trying to say something about quote unquote I, that is the self. So he conceives rational psychology as proceeding on Cartesian lines and as arguing from the I think to the soul as a simple substance which is permanent and self-identical in time throughout all accidental changes. Actually, the self as a substance is the first paralogism. There are 4. So I am concentrating only on the first paralogism. The project of rational psychology is, however, founded by Christian Wolff. It starts from an empirical study of operations of the self. It creates a nominal definition of the self that speaks about some observed features of the self. It helps to identify the real essence of the self. That is the project of rational psychology. It is found that thinking is the central feature of the self, and this thinking must be grounded in something. According to Kant, rational psychology must proceed a priori because it is not an empirical science. So it starts from the a priori condition of experience, that is the unity of apperception. So I think the whole expression is the only text of rational psychology, from which it started the full system. According to Kant, rational psychology contains a fundamental paralogism. What is a paralogism? It is a logically fallacious syllogism. In an ordinary syllogism, we can find formal fallacy, but in transcendental paralogism, in Kant's philosophy, it is an attempted syllogism in which a formally invalid conclusion is drawn from a transcendental ground. According to iron proofs, Kant's paralogism is not to be understood as a simple form criticism of rational psychology. The paralogism, whose form is defective because of the fallacy of ambiguous middle, has 3 different styles of criticisms. First one is a simple kind of ambiguous middle, but it's not simply the fallacy of ambiguous middle, then it will become the formal fallacy. So it is made on the transcendental ground. In the second, the middle term of the minor premise matches the meaning of the middle term of the major, but with that common meaning, the minor premise is not known to be true. In the third, the middle term matches and the premises are known to be true, but the conclusion is so weak that it is irrelevant to the point at issue. There are 4 such paralogisms. The first seeking to prove that the soul is a substance. The second is that it is simple. The third is that it is a person. And the fourth is that the existence of things outside one's own perceptions is doubtful. Kant regarded the first paralogism to be the foundation of all rational psychology. We find 2 different versions of this paralogism in the A and B edition of Critique of Pure Reason. I am considering the B edition because it is more matured formulation. The formulation is like this. Premise number 1, that which cannot be thought otherwise than as subject does not exist otherwise than as subject and therefore substance. Number 2, a thinking being considered simply as such cannot be thought otherwise than as subject. Therefore, it exists also only as subject, that is, as substance. The argument is fallacious because the whole phrase, quote, cannot be thought otherwise than as subject, unquote, does not mean the same in the major premise as it does in the minor. In the major premise, the thought referred to is the thought of an object in general, and therefore of an object given in intuition. But in the minor premise, there is no question of any thought of an object in general. It is only of thought in relation to self-consciousness. So, from the fact that the quote-unquote I that thinks belongs to thought always as subject and never as predicate, it does not follow that this I is a self-subsistent being or substance. So, we are starting from the I who is the thinking subject. From that thinking subject, we cannot derive that this I is an existent subject. So, to suppose that it does, that it exists according to Kant, is to mistake purely logical considerations for metaphysical ones. Kant does not question the truth of either premise when taken by itself. Both the premises are true by their own value, but when we combine them and try to deduce one conclusion from them, then the phrase which is used in the first premise and the second premise, they don't mean the same thing. That is the problem. So, according to him, each premise is an analytical proposition and they are true. For example, if the thinking being considered purely as thinking being of the minor premise is understood as the ego of pure apperception, it is analytically true that it cannot be thought otherwise than as subject. But then the word subject is not being used in the same sense in which it is used in the major premise. So we cannot draw the synthetic conclusion that the ego of pure apperception exists as substance. According to Kant, the permanent ego is not given in intuition. Here we cannot apply to it the category of substance. This is what Kant says. Now, centering the issue of transcendental dialectic, there have been many debates over Kantian distinction between phenomena and noumena, metaphysics and psychology. Many neo-Kantians like Hermann Cohen has defended against the charge of psychologism also against Kant. Such response we find even in the Anglo-American tradition, where Strawson spoke about Kant's analytical arguments for the necessary conditions for the possibility of experience and cognition. So what is important here in this context? What is important in his critique of pure reason? What is important with the area, with the issue of dialectic? When we speak about transcendental dialectic, what is the importance of that portion in critique of pure reason? Is that the regulative use of the ideas of pure reason? Is that the Kant's indirect argument against transcendental idealism, that is the antinomies? Is that important? Sometimes it is said that it is the program of transcendental criticism which is the chief project. So it deals with pure reason's systematic detection and explanation of reason's own excesses. According to Kant, in its pursuit of speculative knowledge, reason has a natural striving to transcend the bounds of sense. Kant finds such attempts to rise above the world of sense through the mere might of speculation as total failure. Now, Kant's exposition of transcendental dialectic has been viewed by iron proofs as having two major parts. Firstly, in respect of the nature of soul, he spoke about transcendental illusion, which is an intellectual illusion that works like perceptual illusion and makes us to accept some invalid arguments as valid. And secondly, he identified some fallacies in this attempt. Now, Andrew Brooke in the Philosophical Review referred to Kant's distinction of paralogism as Kant's notoriously obscure chapter on the paralogisms in the Critique of Pure Reason. Why obscure chapter? Kant's account is often put to question. What is the question? It can, however, be argued that the presupposition and necessary condition of all experience is precisely a permanent ego, and that if experience is real, its necessary condition must be real. So if the presupposition is a permanent ego, and if the presupposition is to be real, then the ego also should be real. If to say this involves using categories beyond their allotted sphere, then this restriction that we should not use it beyond the sphere, it becomes questionable. So Kant's restriction becomes questionable. If, however, we admit all Kant's premises, then we can hardly avoid drawing his conclusion. So the validity of transcendental dialectic depends to a great extent on the validity of the transcendental aesthetic and transcendental analytic. So among the several issues raised against Kant, we may refer to two such debates. Number one, how is paralogism related to the whole book, Critique of Pure Reason? And number two, what is the primary objective of the paralogisms? These two questions, of course, are linked with each other. Opinions differ regarding the issue whether paralogism is to be studied as a critique of pure reason, where the claim of rational psychology is questioned, or whether paralogism is mere extension of the discussion of transcendental unity of consciousness. We have to remember that Strawson tried to see the paralogisms as an extension of the discussion of transcendental unity of consciousness. But the book Kant's Theory of Mind by Karl Emmerich shows that Kant's focus is mainly on the rational psychologists. Closely linked with the same question is another issue, whether metaphysical issue is the primary objective of paralogisms, or whether they mainly involve confusion about the use of language. In the book Kant's Theory of Mind, it is shown that in the paralogisms, metaphysical issues are primarily important and confusions about the use of language is secondary. On the other hand, Strawson put primary importance on the confusion about the use of language. According to Strawson, the fact that lies at the root of Cartesian illusion is this. In case of any self-ascription, this is very important to understand because he speaks about justification here. In case of any self-ascription of a current or directly remembered state of consciousness, no criteria of personal identity is needed to justify the use of the pronoun I to refer to the person having that experience. This is the view of Strawson. So, we can only raise doubt whether the source of confusion about I, if there is any confusion, then whether it is linguistic or it is epistemological. So regarding metaphysical, there is no question because it is enough. When I use the pronoun, it is enough to justify that it is there. At this juncture, we may point out that in some other places, the B addition is interpreted as speaking only about the grammatical distribution of the first person singular pronoun, only the grammatical distribution. And so it fails to throw light on how the self can be conceived. And it is further said that this paralogism has no impact on the issue whether the self is a substance or not. It is simply about the grammatical distribution of the first person. Now, does this conclusion throw away all the doubt about the issue? It seems rational to agree with Patricia Kitcher as she observes the reformulation of the paralogism focuses on what use is served by the first person singular pronoun I. So it is actually speaking about the subject of consciousness. It is about the reality of the subject of consciousness. It indicates that the subject is there having that experience. And here we may connect the project of refuting the claim of rational psychology with Kantian doctrine of I think from the transcendental deduction. In the book I, Me, Mine, Back to Kant and Back Again, Beatrice Longuenes views Kant in a broader frame. Here Kant's attempt is related to the recent debate in analytic philosophy of language and mind. And here the question becomes, what is self-consciousness and in what ways does it relate to our use in language and in thought of the first person pronoun I? Sometimes it is found that Kantian insights on self-consciousness here is sometimes it is linked or it is related to the insights of Wittgenstein, Gareth Evans, G.E.M. Anscombe, and Sidney Shoemaker. So it becomes an important issue in the analytic philosophy of mind. Kant, however, believed that the impulse to metaphysics is an ineradicable impulse in the human mind. Metaphysics, considered as a natural disposition, according to him, is possible. In Transcendental Dialectic, he tried to project pure reason as a faculty distinct from understanding. In his own way, he tried to connect the three main cognitive faculty with the different parts of syllogism. Understanding is a faculty of general rule that is used to apprehend the major premise. Judgment is a faculty that subsumes the particular under the universal, and it is connected with the minor premise, while reason draws the conclusion. He distinguishes reason from understanding also. Reason can be used in a logical manner, like understanding, where it abstracts from all contents of knowledge. But reason is also capable of a real use because it contains within itself the source of certain concepts and principles. In the former one, reason is a faculty of making immediate inferences. In the latter, it is distinct from understanding. So in this way, we can interpret the reason, actually the reason behind the jump from the maxim to the, that was the source of the illusion. The jump from the maxim to the principle is that the thinking being must be able to be used as a subject in the judgments. According to Kant, all cognitions are to be linked with the proper power of apperception, and in B edition, he calls the principle of the unity of apperception as the supreme principle governing all conditions. Such an account seems to fit the definition of a substance. So the inevitability of the paralogism about soul as substance is due to the demand of reason. It is important to note that in Prolegomena also Kant has used the idea that soul is a substance. He has used the idea. He has not proved it, established it, but he has used it. Quote, "It has been long observed that in all substances the true subject, namely that which remains after all accidents have been removed, and hence the substantial itself, is unknown to us." So he has made in paralogism, he has made a claim that consciousness of self is presupposed by consciousness of other things, and that consciousness of oneself does not provide knowledge of oneself is exhaustively explained by Kant in his unfinished work, Opus Posthumum. Now, let me refer to the another objection, just refer to the other objection raised by Jacobi, Weihinger and Strawson, where it is asked how to connect Kant's transcendental psychology and his metaphysical framework. The doubt about identifying the faculty of cognition with the phenomenal mind or the nominal mind may be avoided by giving priority to phenomenal mind, because the phenomenal mind is the mind of the cognizer. It will not be irrational to take a further step to say that cognition under normal circumstance is never objectless. So it is connected with the empirical world also. In fact, any discussion has an inevitable epistemic tone, and it has a directedness to the world. Here we may remember Davidson's view that human beings share a system of beliefs insofar as they possess linguistic capacity. The issue led him to conclude that through language we reach not only our thought about reality, but reality itself. So it may be said that Kant's transcendental philosophy is closely linked with his metaphysical investigation, metaphysics defined in his own way. It may be viewed as a connection between the functions of cognition and the necessary structure of reality. The relationship is foundational in some sense, which carefully knits the base of his transcendental-psychological approach to metaphysics. A last comment to be made here, while apprehending that there is no soul as a substance, one also needs to understand that unless we accept the causal determination of all phenomenal events and beliefs in the permanent ego in the sphere of nominal reality beyond experience, one cannot have the postulation of freedom of will. Morality cannot be explained without freedom of will. Kant was the first philosopher who identified humanity with morality, and it may be the spirit that worked strongly behind transcendental dialectic. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Manidipa, to give us such a comprehensive as well as a detailed step-by-step demonstration, bringing in so many, modern commentators. And I just invite the audience for their questions, comments. Okay, due to paucity of time, we have.
Hello. So my question was that in the introduction to CPR, he makes a distinction between analytic a priori and synthetic a priori. And then later on, obviously, the transcendental dialectic comes up, and where he discusses how our reason can somehow transgress the boundaries of intuition. Do you see any connection between these two? And do you think we can read Kant as saying that synthetic a priori is how we should do metaphysics and we should not go beyond that? If that is the case, what would you say about his own metaphysics that he has in transcendental deduction basically described? The second order transcendental logic that he has, the whole discussion on that, where do you place that? Because it's not intuitive to me how that is related directly to intuition. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, when he discussed about the judgments, he spoke about the empirical judgment that we have, because according to Kant, knowledge is judgmental. So knowledge is not something abstract. Any sentence, any statement is a knowledge. That is, judgment is a knowledge. Now, he distinguishes between three kinds of propositions, unlike his predecessors, and he introduced the synthetic a priori. The explanation, I am not going into that. But if he were to say only that we know these three kinds of statements and that's all, then it is one side of his theory. Until and unless he proves that why metaphysics is not possible, metaphysical statements are meaningless. So I have mentioned one sentence that both Hume and Kant, they rejected metaphysical statements, but his reason was different from Hume's reason. Because Hume believed in two kinds of judgments, Kant in three. But metaphysical statements cannot be accommodated in those three kinds of judgments. So why should I say, if I simply say that no, it is not possible to know, then there should be the explanation. So he wanted to show that if you want to know that, if you want to justify the metaphysical statements, you will be involved in difficulties and there will be mistakes. That was the reason of writing dialectic. That was the reason of that speaking about paralogisms, the antinomies, and the whole ideas of purism. That's the answer.
Any other quick question? Professor Shigdin. Okay. Yeah, one quick question and one quick answer. Please.
really interesting way of covering both the Kantian literature and a lot of the contemporary commentators as well. It's great. I just had a question about what sometimes is called the empirical self in the literature. So it does look as though we're able to, in inner sense, identify a series of thoughts or sensations and so forth, and describe them to one thing over time. And so there's a temptation to think that that's got some kind of substantial element, not the high rationalist substance that Wolff was talking about and that Kant wanted to reject. But is there any notion of substance that would be appropriate for the empirical self?
Empirical self is a cognizer who thinks about it, who says that I do this and I think, etc., etc. So it's not the question of one single person saying something. This I is used, the pronoun is used by each and every person. So it's not that there is one one I which is permanent and which is used by each and every person. But in each case, that is why I refer to the case that there was a distinction between the nominal mind and the phenomenal mind. Kant made the distinction. And there was a confusion that with whom I am to attach the faculty of understanding, with whom I am to attach the faculty of sensibility. Definitely, if I am to attach it, definitely I will speak about the empirical, the phenomenal mind. But of course, until and unless I believe in the permanency of the soul, I cannot think, because the theory, his ethical theory is to be connected with the epistemological theory also. And that is why if he connects virtue with happiness, if he says that morality is the way to do moral actions, that is the end of morality. And if there is a goal, there is no surety that I will reach that goal. But there is a goal, it is before me, that virtue should be rewarded with happiness. And to that goal we give the name God. That is why he didn't give any interpretation or any argument for the existence of God. So nominal mind, that is a problem. Nominal mind should be there. We have to approve that is the necessity why he is thinking about. But the illusion is that if reason tries to give a positive, rational explanation of an existent self, that is the questionable thing. That is the answer.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the question.